So the last time we were together, I shared a message entitled, When You Stop Before You're Finished. We were looking at Paul in one of his prison epistles in Timothy. And I've sort of been hung up in the reading of Paul's letter to Timothy in the prison epistles. Because here's a man who knows that death is coming. Here's a man that knows tragedy is on its way. But yet he's an encourager to those who are still on the exterior. And that's one of the things as followers of Christ that we sometimes miss. We close doors when we're going through difficulty and don't realize sometimes that if we open the doors, we are the witness that Christ has called us to be to others who are going through difficult times. It's interesting that we merge this message in Memorial Day today with Pentecost Sunday. This is the day where we celebrate and we recognize what took place in the book of Acts when the Spirit of the Lord came on that upper room and they were filled with the Spirit. And the Bible tells us that the Holy Spirit has come upon us to give us the power to be witnesses. And we are never more of a witness than whenever we stand in the times of difficulty and we proclaim the Word of God. And this is what Paul is doing. Paul is in prison, but he's still sending an encouraging message to his protege, Timothy. Today I want to talk to you in a Memorial Day message, but also in a message of spiritual remembrance of those who have gone before us. I want to tie these all together, and I want to tie Pentecost Sunday into this. So we're going to do a threefold chord in this message today. And I want to entitle this today, I Remember You. I Remember You. Our main text is going to be taken out of 2 Timothy chapter number 1 and verse number 3. Paul, writing to young Timothy, makes the statement, he said, I thank God whom I serve, as my ancestors did, with a clear conscience. As night and day, I constantly remember you in my prayers. On this Memorial Day weekend, as we come together for this season, we gather not only to remember the men and women who gave their lives in service for our nation, but we gather because remembrance is also a holy act. When we come together and we remember, the scriptures are filled with people that the Bible says God remembered. He remembered Noah on the waters. He remembered Abraham in his waiting. He remembered Hannah in her weeping. And he remembers every soul who has poured out their life for their country or for the gospel of Jesus Christ. He remembers them, and their name is in the palm of his hand. So today we're gonna worship a God who doesn't forget and who doesn't waste. He doesn't waste a tear, he doesn't waste a life, and he doesn't waste our faith. You see, there's three words that we're going to dive into. Three words that are going to be our mantra whenever we walk out of here. I remember you. Three words. There's a moment in the New Testament that it's easy to pass over if we're not careful. It's tucked into the opening lines of what we know as Paul's second letter to Timothy, a letter written from a cold Roman prison cell by an aging apostle who knew his execution was imminent. If you remember the last time I was sharing with you, it was about 3 weeks ago. I had this table over here, and on it, I had the picture that we had taken from Paul's prison. And we were talking about this is some of the same writings that is coming out of that dark place. Paul knew that he wasn't going to live much longer. He knew it. And he has said it much in a few chapters later. He said, I have fought a good fight. Our text from a couple of weeks ago. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. These are the words of a man who had made peace with his own mortality. And yet from the chains and the shadows in that dark, damp prison cell, facing death, Paul picks up a pen, and the first thing he says to his young protege, Timothy, was this. He says, I thank God, whom I serve, as my ancestors did, with a clear conscience, as night and day, I constantly remember you. Where? In my prayers. He couldn't be with him, but he knew his prayers could be with him. 3 words that are loaded. I remember you. They're loaded with love. They're loaded with history. They're loaded with the full weight of everything that Paul and Timothy had been through. The missions, the beatings, the imprisonments, the churches planted, the tears shed, the gospel preached. And on this Memorial Day, these words seem especially weighty as we say, I remember you. I remember. Because that is what precisely this day is about. It's about a nation pausing long enough to say to those who gave their lives, to the men and women who gave everything in the service of our country, to say, I remember you. Your name is not lost. Your sacrifice is not forgotten. You matter. I want us for a moment, if you are here today and you have someone who has given their all in service for our country, I would like you to stand where you are. It doesn't matter how far back the lineage goes. But if you are here today and you have someone who has given their life for our country, would you please stand? Today we honor the heritage that you have. Today we honor the legacy that you have. And I want us to pause for a moment in remembrance of those men and women who have given their lives for our country. Would you please pause with me? Thank you for the honor of giving those that you had no control over for the sake of our country. We honor you today. This morning I want us to look back and to look closely at what it means to truly remember. Not the surface level, momentary kind of remembering, but the deep, transformative kind that Paul modeled towards Timothy. Because I believe that when we understand how Paul remembered, it changes the way we remember those who have gone before us. And it changes how we live in response to that. You see, this was not just something that was an abstract day that was pulled out of the air. Listen for a moment at the history of the day that we come to know as Memorial Day. The Civil War had claimed more than 620,000 American lives, roughly 2% of the entire population. I want to let that rest with you. More than 2% of the entire population. Entire communities had been hollowed out. Mothers had buried sons. Wives had buried husbands. Children were growing up without fathers. And in the aftermath, people did what grieving people had always done across every culture and in every area. They went to the graves to remember. They brought flowers. They knelt in the dirt and they whispered their name in the silence. On May 1, 1865, just weeks after the war had ended, in Charleston, South Carolina, 10,000 people gathered. They were mostly former enslaved men and women and children recently freed. They had spent weeks properly reburying 257 Union soldiers who had died in a Confederate prison camp and had been buried in a mass grave at a racetrack. On that spring morning, 3,000 black school children led a procession carrying flowers and singing songs. They gathered around the graves of the men and women who had fought for their freedom. Historian David Blight has called that gathering the first Memorial Day. 3 years later, in 1866, General John A. Logan of the Grand American Army of the Republic officially proclaimed May 30th as Decoration Day, a day for Americans across the nation to decorate the graves of fallen soldiers. At Arlington Cemetery that first year, 5,000 people gathered and decorated more than 20,000 graves. After World War I, it was expanded to the honor of the fallen of all wars. And in 1971, Congress officially established it as a federal holiday, observed every last Monday of May. But here is what I want you to hear. Memorial Day was never meant to be just a day off from work. It was not designated as the unofficial start of summer, a time for cookout and sales. It was designated and designed to be a day of sacred remembrance, a day when a nation stops and says, "We have not forgotten you." Please watch this. Today, as we look at Paul and Timothy, the first thing that I want to remind you out of this passage that we read is that remembrance is always relational. Paul said to Timothy, "I thank God whom I serve, as my ancestors did, with a clear conscience, as night and day I constantly remember you in my prayers. Recalling your tears, I long to see you, so that I can be filled with joy." Notice what Paul remembers about Timothy. He doesn't remember his theological certifications. He doesn't remember his preaching stats. He doesn't remember the churches he has been at. He didn't talk about the miles that they had walked together. He remembers Timothy's tears in a time when he needed comfort. Recalling your tears, it was likely a memory of their last parting. Perhaps in Ephesus, where Paul looked back as Timothy wept as Paul was taken away. Paul chained, and on his way to Rome had looked and seen the face of this young man that he loved like a son. He saw his eyes and his face wet with grief. And years later, alone in a dungeon, this is what Paul remembers. Not an accomplishment. He remembers a face, a moment. He remembers a human being. And on Memorial Day, it's easy to remember the wars. It's easy to remember the battles, to remember the dates. But we also must return to what makes this remembrance truly meaningful. It is that name of every individual that is on a memorial wall, that is engraved in a headstone somewhere, that said, I will give all for the cause. Behind every folded flag, behind every golden star, there is a person. There's someone who had a family that misses them. Someone who had the habit of making terrible jokes. Someone who called home every Sunday. Someone whose absence left a shape in the world that can't be filled by anyone else. And when Paul says, I remember you, he was saying, I remember Timothy the person, not Timothy the church worker, not Timothy the evangelist. I remember our connection. Today, we're called to remember in that same way. Not to remember the abstract concept of people who have gone before, but to remember actual human beings who lived and breathed and chose to give everything. You see, number two, remembrance traces a lineage. Remembrance traces a lineage. 2 Timothy 1:5. He says, I am reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded that this thing is still in you. You see, Paul's remembrance of Timothy doesn't begin with Timothy. It begins with Lois, a grandmother, then to Eunice, then to Timothy, 3 generations. A lineage of sincere faith that is passed from grandmother to mother to son. That is the lineage that we, as not only Americans, but most importantly as children of God, that is the lineage that we must make sure does not have a break in that line of lineage. The Greek word translated sincere is anapokotis. It means unfinged, unhypocritical. It means genuine. It's not a faith that is performance. Have you ever seen people that just know when to turn on the spiritual button? To turn on the praise gods, the raise your hands? You see, that's not genuine faith. That is acting. Genuine faith and genuine times with God means that whenever it's bad, I can still say Jesus and have a smile. It still means that that lineage is still there with me. It means that living faith. Lois likely never preached a sermon. Eunice probably never planted a church. But they gave something to Timothy that no seminary could replicate. They gave him a front row seat in what it looks like to truly believe. Because you see, sacrifice is not for me. Sacrifice is for the person coming, for the next generation. This is a profound Memorial Day truth. Freedom is never generated in a vacuum. It's always inherited. It's always passed down. The freedoms we enjoy today were purchased by people who lived before us, many of whom will never live or never live to see the fruit of their sacrifice. Think about the young soldier on the beach of Normandy in 1944. He didn't get to come home and enjoy the peace he helped secure. but his children did, and his grandchildren, and their children, and perhaps some of them, or even some of you are still sitting in this room, a living nation shaped by the willingness to give everything. You see, Paul passed something down, not by living long, but by dying faithful. Paul traced Timothy's faith back to Lois and Eunice. We trace our freedom back to the ones who bled for it. And in both cases, the right response is not entitlement. I'm going to let that simmer right there. Because we live in a nation that feels they are entitled. You are entitled to life that God gave you. But outside of that, it's about grinding it out. The question this morning is not only do you remember those who sacrificed, the question is also, what are you doing with the inheritance you left? You see, I've been left an inheritance. I've been left an inheritance that I know of for 3 generations. I've been left that inheritance. My father didn't fight in the military. He was a little bit, they said he came under the height. But I did have many who were in the war, who battled there. And I stand here today, you go, well, all right, we're in a mess. Let me tell you, we've always been in a mess. America has always been in a mess. Every nation has always been in a mess. Because the only place that will never be in a mess is when we all get to heaven. What a day of rejoicing that'll be. When we all see Jesus, we will sing and shout the victory. We may break out the Redback hymnal in a minute. You see, what are you doing with the inheritance? Because your inheritance has a lineage. You see, remembrance should stir us. Remembrance should stir the living. This, Paul says in 2 Timothy 1:6, for this reason I remind you to fan the flame, the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. Notice this transition. Paul moves directly from remembrance to a charge. And if we live in the past, we will never have a future. If you live only in the past, you will never have a future. If you always go back to, well, you don't understand what happened to me, you don't know how bad it was. Listen to me, everybody. Put your boots on and keep trudging, because your past does not define you. How you handle today does. Paul moves to a charge. He doesn't linger on sentimentally. The memory of Timothy's sincere faith and of Lois and Eunice before him becomes the fuel for the call to action. Fan the flame. This Greek word means to stir up, to rekindle, to cause to blaze again. The implication is that a fire can die down and a gift can grow cold. A calling can become dormant. And the antidote, at least in part, is to go back and remember where it started. And today, on this Pentecost Sunday, it aligns with Memorial Day, and we must remember our historical heritage, but more importantly, we must remember our spiritual heritage. There are men and women who, when the call to go and minister came, they would leave a family at home. They would travel either by walking, either by donkey, either by hitching a ride on a wagon. They would get to creeks. They would take off what they could. They would put it in a backpack, swim to the other side, put their clothes back on, and find the next place to preach, sleep in a barn somewhere, get paid in eggs or whatever they could, sometimes nothing, come back to a home where a wife had held everything together, and we complain because the air conditioner doesn't work right. We forget the sacrifice of our heritage. We forget why we're here. Paul is saying, remember where you came from. Remember who you believed in. Remember the faith of Lois and Eunice. Remember what was laid on you at your ordination. And let all of that remembrance cause something in you to blaze again. You see, in the spiritual realm, we have saints who have gone before us. Hebrews tells us there is a great cloud of witnesses. There are those people who prayed through the night, who gave their lives for the gospel. They're not asking for monuments. They are asking us to carry the flame and not to let it grow cold and to keep going. Paul is writing from a dungeon. He knows he will not get out, but he's not writing a eulogy. I want you to think about what I just said. Paul is not going to get out, but Paul is not writing a eulogy. Paul is writing a charge. He is reminding them to go forward and not give up. You see, remembrance requires courage. 2 Timothy 1:7. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid or fearful, but it gives us power, love, and a sound mind or self-discipline. It's not accidental that Paul moves from remembrance directly to a rebuke of fear. I want you to think about that. Paul moves from remembrance to a rebuke of fear. He knows Timothy. He knows that this young pastor is in Ephesus facing opposition, discouragement, perhaps temptation to walk away from the hard work of the ministry. And Paul's answer is stunning in its simplicity. You have not been given a spirit of fear. You have been given power, love, and a sound mind. Now act like it. The Greek word translated timid is delia. It can mean also cowardness. Paul is not being harsh. He's being honest. He's saying, I remember your sincere face. I remember your grandmother and your mother. And knowing all of that, there is no room for cowardice. Yes, they felt fear. Yes, they felt like giving up at times, but they moved forward anyway. Paul is also reminding us that as a soldier, we must finish well. 2 Timothy 4:6-8. Paul, in many ways, is also about a Memorial Day story. 2 Timothy 4:6-8. If the band comes, please. For I am ready to be poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. I have fought the good faith. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is for me a crown of righteousness. Lance, let's play the last song that we did today in the set. There is a crown of righteousness which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but to also all who have longed for his appearing. I want you to read slowly. I am already being poured out like a drink offering. Paul is using sacrificial language. A drink offering had to be poured out completely. Nothing held back. Nothing saved for later. A drink offering was down to the last drop. Paul is saying, I've given everything. I have no regrets. I have fought the fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. This is the language of a soldier who knows they've completed their assignment. This is what it sounds like when someone reaches the end and can look back with a clear conscience. And what Paul receives in return is not a pension. It's not a parade. He receives something better. Paul receives a crown of righteousness from the righteous judge. Not from Rome, not from the crowds, but from the one who sees all and forgets nothing. The men and women who gave their lives didn't do it going, make sure my name is spelled right on a monument. They did it because of what they believed in. And we can live well with the freedom they purchased. We can remember, not just in May, but we can remember every day. We can say with our lives, not just with words, I remember you. So we have a letter that outlived its author. Paul wrote 2 Timothy from a cold Roman prison. Tradition tells us he was cold. He asked Timothy in 2 Timothy 4:13 to bring his cloak. He was alone. He says in verse number 11, he says, only Luke is with me. Here's a man who gave his life. Here's a man who pioneered the faith. And at the end of his life, he was alone. But he didn't write about his anger. He wrote about a promise. He wrote about the act of remembering Timothy. And he told him, I want you to do something. And I believe it's the same charge that we have to do. I have to do it. I have to fan the flame. There's times, and I'm honest with you, we've been through things, and I told Brenda some time back, I was going through just mental stuff after all the things that had been going on and all of this and everything. I told her, I said, I'm going to hand in my ministry card. I said, I can go do something else. And I can punch in and punch out. And we say those things. Those things are real. I love David's writing because David says the same thing. Really? Really? David failed. David made mistakes. But the Bible authors David as a man after God's own heart. So here's what I have to tell you. After you've expressed your heart, take on God's heart. Can I say that again? After you've expressed your heart, and those things happen, we express our heart. Anyone ever been angry before? Do you feel like you're still saved? No, we'll have an altar call in a moment. I've been angry. I've been angry. And sometimes our anger goes up. Sometimes we ask the big questions. Listen to me. Somebody needs to hear this. If you're going to ask the big question, be ready for the big answer. And the big answer is, I remember you. Not as a past thing. I remember you now. You're written right here in the palm of my hand. Your tears, oh, I've got a room in heaven to where they're stored. And I know when we get to heaven, some of us are going to say, I hope that he's got an entire room because I've been a sobbing mess at times. And that's okay. But what did Paul tell Timothy? The same thing the Lord has had to tell me time and time again. Stir up the flame that your grandfather left, that your grandmother's left, that your daddy left, that your mama left. Remember, you got to hand it off. And today, we remember those who gave all. My question for you is, when the end comes, can you say, I gave it all. I'm being poured out like a drink offering.